everyone, and welcome. I'm Emma, one of the librarians here at Rockland Public Library, and we are so thrilled to be hosting tonight's Camden Conference community event. I'm going to start off by first noting that those of us who are doing in person who have braved the cold tonight are welcome during to the Q&A period to just raise your hand, and I will run this handheld mic over to you so that the people on Zoom can hear your question as well. And people on Zoom, I think that's that camera. Zoom people, if you'd like to type your question into the chat, and I will read it aloud to you or aloud for you to Sarah. And I think that's it for that. Next couple events coming up at the library. Next week on February 9th at 6 p.m., we'll be doing a mushrooming talk by Greg Marley, who's going to be talking about specifically edible mushrooms for the beginner that do not have toxic lookalikes. It's a really good program that's for the beginner. And we love him. He's fantastic. And then the week after that, on the 16th, we'll be celebrating the new films that have been entered into the public domain this year with The Kid Brother from 1927. And that's at 6 o'clock p.m. on February 16th. Hello. And I think that is it from me. Yes. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill from the Camden Conference, who will be introducing tonight's speaker, and then we'll dive right into it. So thanks for everyone for joining, and welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Em. Welcome, everyone out there in Zoom land. My name is Bill Bachhoffner, and on behalf of the Camden Conference, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. We would like to thank Rockland Public Library and the Friends of the Rockland Public Library for making these programs possible. And we'd like to especially thank Em for hosting us again this conference season. She's done a wonderful job, and the upgrading of equipment has allowed for in-person and Zoom attendance. The Camden Conference is a nonprofit, nonpartisan citizens forum driven almost exclusively by volunteers from our community. The mission of the Camden Conference is to foster informed discourse on world issues. In keeping with our mission, we offer a series of community events leading up to our annual weekend conference. These free events are intended to provide background on the yearly topic and to touch on areas related to the February conference that may not be covered in its 3-day format. This year's conference, our 36th Global Trade and Politics, Managing Turbulence, will take place in a very short time on February 17th to 19th at the Camden Opera House live, and it will also be streamed to Rockland, Belfast, Portland, and Hanover, New Hampshire. Tonight, as part of the conference community events series, it is my pleasure to introduce Sarah Curran, who shares her insights regarding Maine's Climate Action Plan and Community Action. Sarah is Deputy Director, Climate Planning and Community Partnerships with the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. In this role, she leads climate policy planning and climate-related programs to support Maine communities. She has a master's degree in community planning and development from the Muskie School of Public Services at the University of Southern Maine. Please give a warm welcome to Sarah Curran.
Bill, and thank you, Em. And thanks, everyone. Nice to see you here this evening. So, back up a little bit. If I speak like this, does it? I want to whisper. My name is Sarah Curran. I am Deputy Director with the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. And I'm going to talk tonight about the Climate Action Plan, Maine Won't Wait, the state's 4-year Climate Action Plan. I'm also going to talk a bit about the state's new program to provide grants and technical assistance to communities to support local climate and energy actions, and share some suggestions for some resources where you can learn more after this presentation. Just briefly, a bit about my office before I get started. The Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation and the Future, which also we call GOPIF, was created by Governor Mills to serve as a key coordinator to work collaboratively with other state agencies and stakeholders to address key policy issues facing the state. So we support planning and implementation by providing research and data and innovative policy solutions. And we work in a number of key areas, including climate energy and the Maine Climate Council, which I'll speak about tonight. Also, the opioid response and prevention is out of our office, the Children's Cabinet, workforce development, and innovation and economic development. So GOPIF coordinates the work of the Maine Climate Council, and we work really closely with the Governor's Energy Office and other state agencies on policy issues to advance climate and energy policy. So I'll focus on climate policy this evening. So the issues of the climate change are urgent. Last year's panel, international panel on climate change, called this moment a code red for humanity. In Maine, we're seeing warming trends on land and sea. They're driving extreme storms, flooding, and drought, all of which pose a catastrophic risk to our state's environment, heritage, and future. And recently at COP27, there was a global call for governments to work together to reduce greenhouse emissions to keep temperatures from rising. And the strategies in Maine's climate action plan are intended to help us do our part to meet the global challenge that is already impacting our state. We believe that the solutions to climate have a great potential to improve the lives of Maine people. And so it's a case where doing the things that we need to do can also have really important co-benefits. So in Maine, climate change is impacting people's lives, their health, their safety, and their livelihoods. We're experiencing flooding and erosion from sea level rise, and expectations for future sea level rise in Maine are 1.5 more feet by 2050 and 4 more feet by 2100. Emergency routes and access to some communities are being cut off by sea level rise and storm surge and severe storm events. Several coastal Maine towns have critical drinking and stormwater treatment facilities that are situated in high flood risk locations, and replacing these facilities could cost millions of dollars. We're having warmer, shorter winters from climate change that are contributing to tick-borne diseases. Ocean heat waves are occurring in the Gulf of Maine, which is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans and is beginning to lose its subarctic characteristics. And our culturally and economically vital lobster industry is subject to risks similar to southern New England states have faced, with ocean temperatures continuing to rise, with disease risk and fewer lobsters. Some of the natural and recreational services enjoyed at coastal beaches and sand dunes will disappear as sea levels rise and damages sand dune systems. And it's not just our marine resources, but also our ecotourism and marine industries. These changes will cascade through our economy and our communities well past the high tide mark. Governor Mills has made tackling climate change a priority for her administration. The core elements of Maine's climate law came from LD 1679, which passed in 2019 and was sponsored by Republican David Woodson and passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. And the law sets our emission targets. It establishes the Maine Climate Council, and it requires a climate action plan for the state to be updated every 4 years. Maine has several important climate goals. The first are our emission reduction targets. These, which I noted, are in state law. 45% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. The governor also recently signed into law a goal to achieve carbon neutrality or net zero emissions by 2045. And the state has a goal to ensure that our people, industries, and communities are resilient to the accelerating impacts of climate change. So where do our emissions come from? The Department of Environmental Protection, Maine DEP, does a biennial greenhouse gas emissions report that measures our progress toward the state emission goals. Our most recent state emissions report from DEP finds that fossil fuel combustion is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, and of that, transportation remains the largest contributor. Knowing where our emissions come from helps the state plan and prioritize climate action. The law created the Maine Climate Council, which started to meet in the fall of 2019. And the Climate Council includes 39 members of scientists, industry leaders, bipartisan local and state officials, and engaged citizens. Hannah Pingree, the director of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, and my boss, co-chairs the Climate Council together with Melanie Loisum, who's the commissioner of the Maine DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. The council also includes 6 working groups and a scientific and technical subcommittee. The working groups help to develop the strategies that the Climate Council included in the Climate Action Plan. And they are a transportation working group, a buildings working group, an energy working group, a coastal and marine working group, a working group for community resilience, public health and emergency management, and a natural and working lands working group. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee was responsible for delivering a report that summarizes the impacts of climate change on Maine and how it might impact our state in the future. And together, the Climate Council and its working groups and subcommittees included more than 230 Maine people with diverse experiences and expertise and backgrounds to develop the state's climate action plan. We've also created a new equity subcommittee to support the planning and implementation of climate strategies to ensure that the benefits of climate action accrue to diverse populations across Maine, recognizing that the effects of climate change will create significant hardships for disadvantaged people and communities, such as low-income residents, older adults, Indigenous people, people of color, and others who are less able to respond. Maine has an opportunity to help people through climate action, and we can help Maine people, for example, reduce energy costs that by installing a heat pump and weatherizing our homes, and those actions and others like them reduce emissions while also helping save people money. Equity is embedded throughout the state's climate action plan, but we really wanted to look more closely at the opportunities for how Maine's climate strategies could be implemented more equitably and metrics through which we could measure progress. And so the equity subcommittee will be delivering their report to the Climate Council later this year. The work of the Climate Council was also informed by several technical and scientific analyses, and there's a lot of great detail in these reports. They're available online. I'm going to just briefly summarize them for you. As I mentioned, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee of the Climate Council was charged with providing a summary of the impacts of climate change in Maine, and they also did some specific projections like estimates of sea level rise. And this report is updated every other year. We had an expert consultant provide economic analysis and greenhouse gas modeling of strategies under consideration by the Climate Council. And that same consultant also produced vulnerability maps looking at the impacts of climate and a cost of doing nothing report that helped us understand what the status quo would lead to. We worked with the University of Maine's George Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions to do some initial equity work, and that is part of what led to the creation of the equity subcommittee. And then the Governor's Energy Office developed a plan to grow Maine's clean energy economy. And this plan covers sectors like renewable energy and clean energy, among many others. There's an incredible economic opportunity in those sectors. On December 1st, 2020, the Maine Climate Council delivered Maine Won't Wait, the state's 4-year action plan to the governor and the legislature. And there are 4 major goals in the state's climate action plan. The first is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to meet the emission reduction targets that are in law. The second is to make Maine more resilient to the impacts of climate change. The third is to foster economic opportunity and prosperity, recognizing that there's significant opportunity not just in the clean energy and renewable energy sectors, but also new market opportunities for some of Maine's heritage industries. And the fourth goal is to advance equity through Maine's response, as I was mentioning, to ensure that those people who are most impacted by climate change benefit from our climate strategies. There are 8 strategies in Maine Won't Wait. The first 3 are about reducing emissions in our transportation, buildings, and energy sectors. The fourth strategy is about the energy transition and the opportunity to create good paying jobs. It's also about protecting jobs that are most vulnerable to climate impacts in Maine. And so how we help our forestry, our fishing, and our agriculture industries prepare for climate impacts and also take advantage of some of the new market opportunities, for example, for climate-friendly forest products. The next strategy is about protecting our environment, including sequestering carbon to meet our carbon neutrality goal. And the next 2 strategies are about investing in Maine communities, helping communities to prepare for climate impacts and also preparing our infrastructure. And last, the success of this plan will require all people in Maine to be involved. And so the final strategy in the plan is about communicating with Maine people about the challenges of climate change and also the opportunities and actions that they can take. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes on each strategy. Strategy A is embrace the future of transportation in Maine. And transportation, as I noted, is the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel combustion. This strategy includes accelerating Maine's transition to electric vehicles with a target of putting 219,000 light-duty electric vehicles on the road by 2030, as well as reducing vehicle miles traveled through strategies like increased access to broadband, improved access to public and shared transportation, and active transportation like pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. Also, development strategies that locate schools and work near where people live to reduce the amount of miles that people have to drive. The second strategy is about modernizing Maine's buildings. Energy prices this winter reinforce why this strategy is so important. About 60% of Maine households rely on heating oil as their primary home heating source, the highest percentage in the country. And heat pumps are a strategy in the Climate Action Plan that can reduce greenhouse gases and save homeowners money on their monthly heating bills. This strategy is about transitioning to cleaner heating and cooling systems with a goal to have at least 130,000 heat pumps installed in Maine by 2030 and more energy efficient appliances. It also includes accelerating energy efficiency improvements to existing buildings by doubling the current pace of weatherization. We were talking earlier before the talk about the challenge of this weekend, and Maine has a lot of really old, inefficient housing stock, which is really challenging for people when the temperature gets cold. This strategy also includes advancing the design and construction of new buildings by developing a long-term plan to phase in modern building codes so that we reach zero carbon emissions for new construction in Maine by 2035. By promoting climate-friendly building products, especially from forest products made here in Maine. And finally, it highlights the opportunity for the state to lead by example in publicly funded buildings like schools and government buildings to demonstrate some of these practices and also save taxpayers money. Strategy C is to reduce carbon emissions in Maine's energy sector. A lot of our climate strategies are about electrification. So electrifying our vehicles, electrifying our heating systems. And as we electrify, we need to make sure that we have the clean energy we need and that it's affordable. And so this strategy is about ensuring that we have an affordable clean energy supply. Our renewable portfolio standard, or RPS, establishes the percentage of electricity that an electricity supplier is required to provide from renewable energy. And Maine has increased our RPS to 80% by 2030 with a goal of 100% by 2050. And that's a very ambitious goal and one that we're on track to achieve. Strategy D is to grow Maine's clean energy economy and good jobs and also protect our natural resource industries. And so this is about transitioning to cleaner energy generation and the economic opportunity and jobs that that offers. It's also about supporting the ability of Maine's natural resource industries to adapt to climate impacts and to take advantage of some of those new market opportunities. The governor has set a goal to double the number of clean energy jobs in Maine to 30,000 by 2030. These are good paying jobs in the clean energy and renewable energy sectors, and definitely some workforce efforts that are underway that are going to be necessary to help us achieve that goal. Strategy E is protecting Maine's environment and our working lands and waters, promoting natural climate solutions, and increasing carbon sequestration. This includes 30 by 30, a goal that 30% of Maine lands are conserved by 2030, including working farmlands and forest lands to keep it working, but sequester that carbon that is necessary for our carbon neutrality goal. Maine is among the most forested states in the nation, with 90% of our land forested. So this strategy is about preserving those natural and working lands to continue to sequester carbon. Strategy F, build healthy and resilient communities. This is about providing state support for communities to be proactive about understanding, planning for, and taking action to reduce their risk from climate change. I'll talk more in a few minutes about a new state program to provide grants and technical assistance, but local action is going to be critical for us to achieve our climate goals. Strategy G, investing in climate-ready infrastructure. As we saw with the recent pre-Christmas storm, more frequent storm events are already impacting our infrastructure in really significant ways. And so the strategy also includes the incorporation of sea level rise projections so that communities know what they're preparing for. And this is a strategy from a Wells roadway from the pre-Christmas storm as photographed by the local police department. This is another example of how important it is to prepare. This is a public safety issue. It's also a local expense issue. Repairing infrastructure when you have big storm events like this is really, really expensive. And so the more we can do to help communities make their infrastructure climate ready and sort of prepare will save us all in the long run. And then strategy H, as I mentioned, is about engaging with Maine people. And so this is about helping people understand both the challenge and the opportunities. It's also about helping Maine students understand Maine's climate and also the necessary skills to meet some of these new workforce and job opportunities. I do want to add with a huge thank you to the more than 200 people who were involved in developing the plan. Maine Won't Wait earned the 2022 Resilience and Sustainability Award from the American Planning Association last year as the premier climate action plan in the country. And the reason that this plan is working is because it's not sitting on a shelf. It's being implemented by communities and businesses and nonprofits and individuals all over the state. So how are we doing? December 1st, 2022 was the 2-year anniversary of the plan, and we released a progress report as well as a new online dashboard that tracks progress against some of the numerical targets that the plan establishes. I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through some of these. The dashboard also includes an interactive map where you can learn more about specific strategies and projects in individual communities. And so you can turn on and off the layers and sort of dive into the data as you'd like to. This map is available online. The ultimate test of our progress is our emissions reductions. The most recent DEP emissions report is the first report to quantify the carbon sequestration benefits of Maine's forests and farms and fields and wetlands. The report found that as of 2019, gross greenhouse gas emissions in Maine were 25% lower than 1990 levels. And so that surpasses the medium-term goal of reducing emissions to 10% less than 1990 levels by 2020. We need to get to 45% lower by the 1990 levels by 2030. So with continued progress in reducing our emissions, the report also indicates that Maine is on our way to meeting our carbon neutrality goal. And as I mentioned earlier, transportation continues to be the largest contributor of emissions from fossil fuel combustion. The pie chart shows the relative contributions by sector. I want to highlight a few specific areas of progress. As we seek to electrify transportation, charging infrastructure is going to be really important. So people need to feel comfortable buying and using electric cars. We've seen significant investment under Governor Mills in public charging, and there's a lot of federal funding coming for this as well to help us expand public charging infrastructure across the state. Use of electric vehicles continues to grow, but we know that this is an area where we need to do a lot more. Supply chain challenges the last couple of years have made this really difficult, but there's renewed interest in the federal level as well. And you're seeing some of the tax credits and other incentives coming out to help sort of move the market. And so I think this is going to be an area where you see a lot of activity in the coming years. An exciting piece of good news through the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. The state received awards from the EPA for 34 electric school buses, the 4th most EV bus awards per capita of all 50 states and the most per capita in New England. This was the result of collaboration across state agencies with local school districts, and we're expecting several more rounds of EPA school bus funding, and so we're hopeful that we'll continue to do as well. I've talked about heat pumps and how they're a great strategy to reduce emissions and also help homeowners save money. The governor set a goal to install 100,000 heat pumps. Right now we're at 82,000. We've made significant progress in this goal, and this is definitely one where we're leading the nation. And we will continue to work on this important strategy because it has just such great co-benefits for Maine people. And these are being installed all over the state. And the data is showing that heat pumps save people money. They offer heating and cooling, which is really important now as our summers and summer nights get hotter, and also reduce our emissions. Weatherizing homes. This is a one that requires a lot of effort. It's a lot of work to go into a house and make it more energy efficient. We have a goal to double the pace of weatherization. We're on target with that goal, but this is going to continue to be a major area of focus. This is also an area of focus for the federal government. So there's there's significant resources coming to support weatherization efforts as well, which is great news for Maine residents. Accelerating the pace of clean energy. Maine is on pace for our renewable portfolio standard requirement as required by law. We are at 48% renewable energy in 2022. We've seen a lot of new solar development, and we will need to continue to develop more renewable energy in order to meet this goal. And again, we see incredible economic opportunity in this sector, the clean energy sector. I mentioned the governor's goal to double the number of clean energy jobs. It includes renewable energy and weatherization. And again, back to that workforce issue. I know you had Amanda Rector here a few weeks ago talking about the demographic challenges in the state. And certainly workforce is going to be a really key issue to achieving many of these strategies. We're continuing to make progress on conserved lands. As I mentioned, the state has a goal to conserve 30% by 2030. 30 by 30 is the goal, including both natural and, importantly, working lands. So these are lands they can continue to be forested, they can continue to be farmed, they will continue to sequester carbon to help us meet that carbon neutrality goal. And the governor invested $40 million in the state's Land for Maine's Future program in her most recent budget, and we need to continue to make that kind of investment in conservation. And now I want to talk about the new program that the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future launched just over a year ago, the Community Resilience Partnership. The idea was to support communities to take climate and energy action. The governor set a goal of engaging more than 100 Maine communities in the program, and we now have 127 communities engaged. It includes 76 fully enrolled communities who are eligible for grants and another 51 communities who are working with service providers to enroll in the program. These are maps from the Climate Action Plan. The first map identifies that many Maine communities lack the planning capacity and resources to prepare for climate change. And the other map is about social vulnerability. Many Maine communities have high levels of social vulnerability that make them more vulnerable to climate impacts and less resilient against them. These are percentages of low-income residents, for example, things that make it hard to weather any sort of disruption, including climate change. And so the Community Resilience Partnership was launched to provide grants and assistance to communities so that all communities in Maine can take climate and energy action to reduce emissions, transition to clean energy, and become more resilient to climate impacts like extreme weather and flooding and sea level rise and public health impacts. The program was funded with $4.75 million in the state budget, and the governor has included additional funding in the state budget that she's just proposed. It includes 3 types of funding opportunities: grants directly to communities to take action, but also importantly, grants to service provider organizations. So regional planning organizations, nonprofits, others who can help communities prioritize and take action, recognizing again that limited capacity that many communities struggle with. And then finally, we have pilot contracts with regional coordinators to sort of help with the longer term implementation. You get your first grant, and then how do you think about the next project on your list? And how do you start to sort of stack up projects and capital to achieve those things? And so we have a pilot program to provide that longer term assistance. And the other thing I'd like to mention is that with so much federal funding available for infrastructure projects, this work is also helping the state develop a pipeline of projects so that as funding opportunities become available, we have projects that are ready to go for federal funding. And that's the website where you can find more information about the Community Resilience Partnership. So communities across the state are using these grants to conduct climate vulnerability studies, to install high efficiency heating and cooling systems, to expand public charging for EVs, to transition to renewable energy, develop resilience plans, and lots of other actions in alignment with the state's Climate Action Plan, Maine Won't Wait. I also want to highlight a website that supports the climate action plan. Maine Won't Wait. Here you can find stories and ideas. The idea is to help individuals, communities, businesses with stories of actions that others are taking and sort of really concrete ideas for what you can do. One of the things that's been most exciting the last couple of years is seeing how Maine Won't Wait has become a blueprint for climate action across the state. And so this website hopes to sort of continue that momentum and support that activity. Finally, I want to highlight some of the new federal funding opportunities that are helping to support Maine's climate action. The Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan is Governor Mills' plan approved by the legislature to invest nearly $1 million in American Rescue Plan funds for economic recovery. The Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, it aligns with existing state plans, including the state's economic plan and the economic recovery plan. And it has significant opportunities for some of our climate and energy goals. So investments in broadband and transportation, energy efficiency, and our heritage industries. And those are all consistent with Maine Won't Wait. So we've seen a lot of really exciting projects funded by the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. We just published a 1-year sort of snapshot of the jobs plan, and there's more data there where you can find projects by community and also get more information about the results of the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. There's also the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or BIL, and I'll try and not use a lot of acronyms, but it gets a little challenging. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law includes significant investments in transportation, in resilience, in environmental protection, energy and energy efficiency, and broadband. And so again, really great alignment with a lot of Maine's climate and energy goals. So in transportation, it includes programs to improve roads, bridges, transit, and electrification. In resilience, it's programs to strengthen our preparedness for storm events and flooding and wildfire, to build resilience in drinking water and wastewater systems, to look at natural capacity of ecosystems and watersheds, and to mitigate contaminants and pollutants. So a lot of really great opportunities there. There's funding in energy programs and building efficiency for energy efficiency of buildings and the expansion of affordable clean energy and transmission networks. And then in broadband and technology, programs to expand access to high-speed internet, which, as I was saying earlier, helps reduce vehicle miles traveled. So these are formula and competitive funds. More are becoming available every day. And our office is helping to support an effort across state agencies to make sure that Maine maximizes the impact of these dollars, that we're going after every opportunity we can, and also providing information for communities about the opportunities that they're eligible for. There's a newsletter that you can sign up for at this website. And then I also want to mention this series of webinars that we're doing. Together with the Maine Municipal Association, the Governor's Infrastructure Committee is holding a series of informational webinars on the funding opportunities for Maine communities under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And so these started on January 5th. They go through March 2nd. I think these webinars are of particular interest to local officials from municipal, county, and tribal governments, also regional providers and others who provide services to communities. And the recordings are available for the previous webinars. And the next webinar is February 16th on energy and energy efficiency. So I wanted to make a plug for those. And then finally, the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, is the most recent one. This is a really significant climate and energy bill at the federal level, more than $370 billion for climate and energy spending, with the aim of reducing US emissions 40% by 2030. So this is funding for climate and energy programs. Again, these programs are just starting. And so we're doing our best to understand them and make information available as soon as we can. But this is definitely going to be important to achieving Maine's climate strategies. And we're really excited about how we can use some of these funds to implement Maine Won't Wait. So the last is just, here's my contact information. I'm happy to share the contents of the presentation. Please reach out if you have questions. I also wanted to share a couple of websites. The first is our office website, the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. Also the climate plan. If you want to take a look, the Maine Won't Wait, the 4-year climate action plan. We also have the progress report. So the 2-year progress report and that dashboard that I was showing you, where you can sort of track real time how we're doing across all of these numeric metrics that we're tracking. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or provide additional information, but thank you very much for having me tonight.
From reading the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, I can tell that climate change, or the subject of global warming, is still nationally controversial in some quarters. But I noted that you said the major legislation was introduced by a Republican. Is there a fair degree of bipartisan support for these programs in Maine?
I think particularly when you're talking about the impacts of climate change, I think the idea is really meeting people with what's important to them. And so a lot of times when we talk about the impacts on the local roads and the erosion that folks are experiencing and the public health and safety concerns, saving taxpayers dollars, right? If you're investing in heat pumps in your local municipal building, or doing other things that bring the local tax burden down, those are things that definitely have bipartisan support. And so we've really tried to focus the Community Resilience Partnership on sort of meeting communities where they're at and finding activities and actions and priorities where people can start with what's important to them.
Right. Well, I have another question.
Sure.
I have the microphone. Just from eyesight, we see that a lot of people in Maine heat with wood.
Yeah.
Is that I assume that's probably a minus. What is the net impact of that? You didn't mention
That
anything
is a good
about.
question for DEP, and they're not here. I will say, I think that's something we're trying to understand in the DEP emissions report. This is the first year that it's taken into account some of that carbon sequestration and tried to look at kind of what's going up into the atmosphere and what's coming down. I think a lot of it has to do with the time scale that you're looking at. When we talk about climate-friendly forest products, we're talking about more durable products. And so things like lumber, cross-laminated timber, structures that store carbon for a long period of time. That's more where our area of focus has been on, is on the products that store it. I would not be able to say specifically about the burning of wood in people's households, but that would be a good DEP question.
Right. Last question, as long as I have the microphone. This is a little perhaps counterintuitive. I'm not minimizing any of the problems that you spoke about, the ocean warming, the effect on the lobster industry, the high water rises and all that, and the storms. But I could understand somebody saying global warming could be one of the best things that ever happened to Maine, in the sense that, we're seen as being cold, long winters, and it's going to get hotter elsewhere. Florida and Georgia and all, southern states, they probably will just turn up the air conditioning, but it will be less habitable in some respects. Is any thought being given to, and it shouldn't be the priority, I agree, but we could have population increases because of global warming. And there could be economic benefits as well. I'm just wondering, is anyone thinking about that?
I think the climate action plan does actually talk about in-migration as something that we need to understand better. And I think we did see some of that in the pandemic, where we did have people moving to Maine. And it is absolutely possible that we'll have more of that, as you said, as the climate here is better relative
Right.
to
And
other
places.
working
conditions and all that.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I think, and that's something we need to do more work on. It's hard to say if those benefit the relative, right, of those, because I think some of the impacts that we're going to experience are so significant. And so some of the storm events and the impact that they're having on erosion and infrastructure, we're very focused on mitigating those impacts. And I think that's what the climate action plan focuses on. I don't disagree that there may also be some benefits to the state. I mean, we were saying we have a workforce challenge.
Yeah.
Come on up.
Right.
But I think it's hard, right? It's different. You think about the change in the growing season, where we have a much longer growing season than we did have. And so that does open some new crop opportunities. And at the same time, you're getting more infrequent rain, more severe rain events, which is really hard for farmers to manage,
Right.
right? And so it's sort of how do you decide the relative weight of those things?
Right. Yeah, I don't minimize those problems at all. I just
Yeah.
think that
But
somebody
you're a
needs
glass,
to
you're a
think
glass
about
half
that.
full kind of a
Yeah,
person,
right.
right?
Sorry, I was late. All right. Okay. So Matt, I do think about how nice it is. My relatives come up because we are a little bit warmer, but I can tell you what they're already saying. You guys still have really warm weather coming up now. And we have more over 90-day,
Yeah.
temperature days. And it's going to mean that we're going to end up, we're not going to look like Florida. I've looked at where we're supposed to be like, it's more like we're going to be like Maryland. And so the question is, who's going to move up? Yeah, really. But who's going to move up here, and are they going to need everybody to suddenly be air conditioned, which is more like Connecticut on south, as far as I can tell. And that's expensive. It's going to make it difficult we're going to be moving into some of the problems of moving even to warmer, and to say nothing of the farming problem with that. There's a lot of things that I worry about. We are still, as you said, the highest proportion of homes that are heated with oil. That's very expensive. How do we move away from that? Do we have the capacity with other options? Heat pumps do get you away from that, right?
Yep.
But then you're adding in, it's forced air and it's electric, is it not?
Yes, heat pumps are electric.
Yes, I know.
And so the great thing about heat pumps in Maine is how much of our electricity comes from renewable resources. And so that's the key, right?
Right.
As we electrify our transportation, as we electrify our heating and
Yes.
cooling systems, ensuring that the electricity that we use to power those things
Right.
comes from renewable energy.
Right. So on that line, I also think about buying an electric car. I do not have one, but my husband insists that's our next car. And our biggest concern is to get it charged. And a lot of the charging stations, by the way, here are not up to snuff in terms of how high they are in voltage or whatever it is one needs.
They're
You're
the
right.
slower chargers, not the fast.
Yes, I know, they're very slow. And that is also not very competitive with a lot of other states,
Yeah.
to say nothing of, we have a lot of reasons people wouldn't want to move here. That would be one of them in terms of being forward thinking. It doesn't look like that is as forward thinking as it should be if we want to get people to accept electric vehicles. We also don't have the technology support, since we have hardly any. I can't get cell phone service half the time, to say nothing of what the really rural part of Maine is getting, which makes it very difficult for people who are coming up. And I know some of them coming up looking for a place where they can live. They can come up here, live, work on their own, because it's, you can do a lot of remote jobs these days, but you can't do it if you can't get, cell towers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So there's another very expensive.
Yep.
And is that in the plan that you guys are talking about, is getting that kind of
So both
broadband?
of those things are. So broadband is absolutely a key strategy in Maine Won't Wait.
Right.
And from our perspective, it reduces, if you can call your doctor, if you can call your work, if you can,
Right.
it reduces the emissions from all of those single person trips that we all take
Right.
to get all of our errands done. So broadband is definitely a key strategy in Maine Won't Wait. And that's one
Right.
of the ones where there is significant federal investment.
Right.
And so the Maine Connectivity Authority was created to manage those dollars coming in and get broadband distributed across the state to those rural areas. And similarly with the electric vehicle charging.
Right,
So,
good.
and I agree, a lot of it is sort of and you don't need a fast charger everywhere, right?
Right,
Like if you're gonna drive to work and charge at work, it can be a slow charger because you're gonna be
Yeah.
there for 8 hours, or the charger that you would have in your home.
Right.
Most people charge their electric vehicle at home. And
Yeah,
so that can
at
be a
night.
slower charger because it can go all night. But
Right.
if you're traveling, you don't want to sit for 8 hours
Right.
waiting for your car to charge.
Right.
And so having the right infrastructure in the right places becomes really important. And so
Right.
the state actually was working on a plan for sort of priority corridors in terms of the initial investment from the
Right.
federal government that's coming in some of those chargers, and thinking about exactly that. Where are the key travel corridors where you need to have those fast chargers? Where are some of the places where it's okay if someone parks in your downtown, goes and has lunch, does a little shopping, charges their vehicle for a couple hours? So it's about sort of figuring out what infrastructure makes sense where. But I completely agree with you. If we want people to transition to electric vehicles, they have to feel confident that wherever they go, they will be able to plug in their car and
Right.
get to the next stop.
We're not at a point where I'm comfortable agreeing with my husband. Our next car is an electric vehicle. I'll tell you,
Yeah.
having looked at that list and where they are, yeah,
Yeah.
they're very remote. They're not all remote, but some of them are for,
Yep.
where you want to go when you're gonna want to spend time for lunch, at that. So, where do we have, we've got a lot of houses that are not, they're all still
Mhm.
on using oil.
Yep.
We have a lot of them are not weatherized.
Yep.
And I know that having worked with senior concerns, with nonprofits, it's just pretty pitiful. So we're going to have to do that. I'm just hoping that this kind of the investment that needs to be made for this is also going to be part of that scorecard.
Yep.
So that we see that we have still all of that set aside for different parts of the state.
Yeah.
So it's equitable, it's worthy of growth, et cetera. Do we also have the businesses growing around the state? Because we had the vulnerable businesses have already been shutting down. We've had a lot of them. The fishing seems to be in a lot of ways a difficult one because we've got some gems like all of our shellfish, et cetera, all kinds that we're trying to revive. But I want to see how are we coming up with additional company support, business support for other kinds of things. You talked about our forestry byproducts that might be competitive, hopefully with other states and even internationally.
Yeah.
But how are we making sure that we've got that kind of support in there? Is it federal support that we're looking for those businesses, or is it for the state only?
So there's a few different things I want to unpack.
Oh, no, I
there.
know. I've got a whole list in mind.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
I think one of the things that you touched on that I really want to highlight is the concern about equity.
Yes.
So making sure that these strategies are reaching our most vulnerable
Yes,
populations.
which is
And
true.
so when we think about who needs heat pumps, who needs
Right.
weatherization,
Right.
that work. So we've had a really amazing equity subcommittee that has met over the last 18 months, and they looked at every chapter in this report
Okay.
and made recommendations about, well, if you're going to do this, this is how you need to be thinking about making sure that you're reaching the most vulnerable,
Okay.
the folks in the rural areas, the low income populations, the people who are already vulnerable. And so they are also vulnerable to climate impacts. And so I want to make sure to highlight that work is really important and
Okay.
ongoing. And the equity subcommittee has actually just wrapped up their draft report, and they're going to be presenting it to the Climate Council in the next couple of months and saying that there's a lot in here already about equity, and these are the things we need to be doing more of. And this is how we can make sure that we're prioritizing those resources to the most vulnerable people. So that's a really important part of what you were saying. And then for the business side, I think some of this is innovation and opportunity, right?
Mhm.
That there's new products. The forest products is a great one to point out, right? That you can have these durable forest products that sequester carbon. And so global demand for those kinds of products is going to grow. And so how is Maine making sure that we're supporting companies that are innovating in those areas, and supporting the growth? And back to that workforce issue, right? Providing the workforce that those companies are going to need to grow. And so absolutely, those are areas where we want to see doing more. There is a lot of money in the federal dollars coming for some of the workforce stuff. So that's really, really exciting. We have a new initiative that was launched by the governor's energy office to really focus on the clean energy workforce. How are we making sure that as we're growing the renewable energy that we need to power the electric vehicles and the electric heat pumps and grow the clean energy economy, that we're providing the workers we need to grow that industry? So
Right.
there's a lot of different pieces in terms of making sure that we're seizing that economic opportunity. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, that has to be an important part of why this is an opportunity for Maine.
Okay. Do you see that we are making progress relative to a lot of our neighboring states, as in the other New England states? Are other neighboring states going to be turning to us for some of our innovations that you are aware of?
I think there are definitely areas where we are leading. We have a really ambitious renewable portfolio standard, saying that we're going to hit that 80% by 2030 and the goal of 100% by 2050. That's nationally very ambitious. So that's really exciting, because that says we need more renewable energy. We want that on our grid. Also, the heat pumps is an area where definitely other states are really excited about what we're doing and calling and asking how we're doing it, because we're doing really, really well there. And that's one where the governor has said 100,000 heat pumps, we're really pushing them. And they have, as I was saying, such great co-benefits, right? You're saving people money, you're reducing emissions. It's a reliable source of heat and cooling, which is important now as we're having those hotter days. So there are definitely a lot of areas where Maine is leading. And I think we also have some real opportunities in our natural and working lands and industries, right? We have some really great seaweed and kind of other aquaculture stuff that's happening that's really innovative and exciting and relates to the carbon sequestration as well. And then some of the things that we've seen just in the pandemic, where people are changing the way they look at supply chains and looking for things that they can find closer that aren't coming from as far away. And that has a great impact on the climate, but it also creates some really new opportunities for the state as well.
Yeah. That's terrific. Yeah. All right. Was there any, I'm sorry, Bill, one more question. Just having listened to Tuck's, what is that his name? Turkle. Thank you. And he was talking about a lot of this. There were two things that were brought up. They were really interesting. One is, I mean, kind of what he said was a lot of Europe, et cetera, is focusing now on trying to get back to nuclear as it is safer, but they're also trying to, it is safer now to have as a source of energy, but it is also going to be exactly what we need relative to the other coal industry, and gas, all of those. So do we have any plans, or was there a lot of discussion, any discussion about the option of nuclear relative to the other electrification, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, so there was the energy working group. You'll remember when I was talking about how the climate action plan was developed, there were sector specific working groups.
Yes.
And so there was an energy working group, and they looked at lots of different opportunities.
Okay.
Nuclear is not one of the recommendations in Maine Won't Wait.
Okay, I should go read about it. All right. And the other thing that he mentioned, that's going. He was just, one other thing that he brought up, it was the siting on solar farms, which we are really going gangbusters on, which I really appreciate. I think that's wonderful, because it's been using a lot of land that has not been considered usable either for economic development or farming or whatever. But that there's a lot of people who do not like how it's being cited. You know, windmills and solar farms can be considered too overwhelming and not very, they don't fit in very well with what people think about Maine with its beautiful hills and valleys and, you know. So do you guys helping people with the conservation end as well as the community end on how to develop that? Do you guys have any experts that you can connect communities with to?
Yeah. So I think they're beautiful, but that's just me.
I know, right?
There was a really great effort by the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry together with the Governor's Energy Office. I know this topic comes up a lot, particularly around farms and the sort
Yes.
of the balance of wanting to preserve prime agricultural lands
Right.
and also allow farmers to get the income from putting solar on their property. And so there was a task force last year that made a bunch of recommendations around how a community can sort of do both those things and how good siting practices, so to speak. So that was the agricultural and solar siting task force. So yes, there is active work underway about how to do the things in complement to each other.
Wonderful. It's good to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Coming your way.
A couple of comments. One, I just checked out a book 2.5 weeks ago from the library called The Ministry for the Future. It's a science fiction by Kim Stanley Robinson. And I heartily recommend it to anyone. It was a 523 page, and I thought this is going to, in fact, I asked, I think, can I extend my checkout? But I read it in 4 days. It was just gripping. And it tells both what could be done in an idealist kind of way and what will happen if it remains status quo that you mentioned. The second thing that I wanted to mention was that it seemed like many of the things where we had to reduce reminded me of losing weight. You can do real good at the front end, and then boy, those last 5, 6, 12, 20, 50 pounds are really tough. And I suspect we're going to run into that as well. And then the question I wanted, how valuable is our water going to be? Our non-seawater, our fresh water, to our people and to our country. Is that factored in here? Is our water seen as a important resource where our manpower is weak? We have tremendous, vast water supplies.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it's not explicitly addressed in the plan. I do think there's recognition of the value of the water resource of Maine. And when you talk about what are the things that we have that would attract people to come, we've had drought 4 out of the last 6 years, right? So the increasing temperatures are definitely a challenge, but we're luckier than many in that way. I think the key, what's really interesting about the law that created the Climate Council is this plan is required to be updated every 4 years, right? And so it's not that these are set in stone, right? And I think that's why it's so important to do the progress report and the tracking and the dashboards so that we can say, this is what we thought we needed to do. And how are we doing? And what's working? And what gets us to that 50%, 60%, 70%? And then where do we need to change course and tack and adjust to get the next? And I think what the Climate Council is required to do is to look at this plan every 4 years and update it and say, we're learning more all the time. And there are going to be things that we say, you know what, we didn't address that and we really need to, or this is going really well, keep going, put more into this, or this isn't achieving quite what we wanted it to. And so I think that's a really important part of the work, is being able to look at the plan and reflect and sort of see, I mean, we're 2 years in. And there's the federal funding opportunities really are significant in terms of achieving a lot of the goals that we have in this plan. And we're just starting to be able to access some of those and to be able to implement a lot of the ideas in this plan. And so seeing where we are 2 years from now, 4 years from now, we have really ambitious goals. And the strategies in here are designed to get us to that goal. But the question of, looking at the future and being able to change course as we need to will be really important too.
I have a couple on the Zoom. Let's see. So Robert asks, Rockland has a significant length of waterfront subject to sea level rise, especially storm surge. Is there any analysis in the plan to this threat and its time frame and what can be done in response?
So that is a great question. So yes, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, which did a very large report on the impacts of climate change in Maine that they delivered to the council at the front end of the planning process so that the working groups and the council sort of knew all that as they were developing the policies. One of the things that group did was establish the sea level rise expectations. And it's a modeling prediction, right? It's what they think will happen. But the idea was exactly that. So the communities could say, what should we be planning for? What will this probably look like 20 years, 30 years from now? And so those are really important. There's also a really exciting effort happening at the Department of Transportation right now. They have a grant from EDA to do more detailed sea level rise modeling, to look at sort of not just assuming it's all going to rise the same, but to look at the different geographies and understand what it will mean to this community relative to this community. And so that the department is really excited to be able to share that with communities when they have that information. And so that'll be really useful. And then the only other thing I'll plug is the Community Resilience Partnership. Rockland actually has a lot of work underway to adapt that really important waterfront, which is economically important. It's part of the downtown, and has received 2 grants from the Community Resilience Partnership to do planning and adaptation work. And what's really great about those is the Community Resilience Partnership grants are $50,000. They're not huge amounts of money, but if a community is able to use them to do the plan or the pre-engineering or the work that allows you to go after federal funding to do some of the construction work. And that's what Rockland has proposed to do, is to use these smaller grants to be able to leverage. So there's been a lot of significant work done on Rockland's downtown.
Thank you. And I have one from Nancy that says, when considering improving infrastructure, is there any focus on the overwhelming need for training welders, plumbers, electricians, mechanics, and other fabrication skills specifically?
Yes. I mean, yes, absolutely recognition. And there's a lot of work happening around workforce and the trades. The governor had a great initiative in her budget last time around free community college for the students who had graduated during the pandemic. And I think that is fantastic. But yes, I think there is widespread recognition that a lot of the strategies in this plan are going to require some significant workforce, including the trades. And particularly, we've been really focused on the clean energy economy and what those skills will be that are required. But I think you're exactly right around infrastructure as well. And being able to make Maine's infrastructure resilient is going to require significant workforce and investment and initiatives.
Excellent. Thank you.
So it's very clear that federal funding has been extremely important
Yes.
in the optimism that you're able to project.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what happens if that there's not a renewal of that, or not if it gets cut off? And I'm also thinking of other states. If we're
Yep.
sort of leading in some important ways, other states down the line might at that point need, if they actually want to do it without federal money, probably it's not going to happen. Is that correct? And how crucial for the success of what you're laying out is another tranche of federal money coming in 5, 6 years.
The federal funding is really significant. So and that's part of why we're working so hard to make sure that we're maximizing these opportunities. These are not strategies that are going to be complete in 10 years, right? I mean, if you think about the amount of infrastructure that we have across Maine in all communities that is vulnerable to sea level rise, to severe storms, to inland flooding, to the freeze thaw cycle that I was just reading an article the other day about loggers and how hard it is for them to go in and harvest now because of the lack of free. I mean, there is just the impacts of climate are accelerating, and we have a lot of work to do to improve our infrastructure. So the federal funding is absolutely important. And we're trying to make the most of the opportunity that we have right now. I mean, that's really it.
Are there things for individuals? You've been talking about, are
Yeah.
there funds available for individuals to participate in this, to improve their house, to
Yep.
weatherize, to et cetera?
I mean, there's a couple different things. I think for individuals, there are specific actions that you can take. And there is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is going to have a lot of tax credits and rebates for things like heat pumps and EVs. Those rules are still coming. We're still working to understand what those mean for an individual purchase, right? And so, but yes, there are going to be significant resources to encourage those kinds of consumer purchases. But the other thing I would say is really important at the individual level is encouraging your community to take action, right? I mean, so thinking about what are the places and the people in your community who are vulnerable to these kinds of impacts. We were talking earlier about the warming centers that communities are creating for the significant cold that we're going to have this weekend. We're finding communities who are doing that work around the summer heat as well, thinking about who in their community is vulnerable to high heat days, and do we have a cooling center for them? Thinking about where are the locations and the people who could be cut off in a severe storm, and how are we thinking about and getting ready for those severe storm events. So I think that's the other piece, is thinking about your role in your community and how you sort of support the community to be taking action, particularly thinking about who's most vulnerable to the impacts. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for having me. I mean, I left my contact information in the show. I'm happy to share the slides, but please follow up. There's a lot of great work happening, and really excited to come tonight and talk with you about it. Thank you.